Humanity, currently, the majority of it believes vaccination saves lives, believes that vaccination lowers disease incidence. The most commonly appealed to evidence for this is the fact that diagnoses over the years have changed in rates. How many people die from diagnoses? How many people receive a diagnosis? These diagnoses change over time in the way in which they are declared or detected and reported. This is not a controlled observation to look at history and say, look at these diagnoses lowering and look at when we started vaccinating. If you just take a sneak peek into the situation, you will find that diseases such as measles and polio have undergone significant diagnostic evolution, as in the way in which we diagnose these diseases has changed several times over the years. And as for assuming or idealizing that some kind of vaccination is causing some kind of disease or an increase of it, we can't really know, because we would need to run a well-controlled experiment for that to come out. There is too much going on in the real world to be making such measurements, as if we have solid grounds to do so. The kinds of people who are tested for diseases and the times that the results are actually reported on to a disease incidence monitoring agency, the kinds of people who are inclined to get vaccinated and who aren't, these things are not solid for us to go and measure the effect of vaccination by looking at diagnoses made, vaccinations done over the years in human populations, or animal for that matter. What we must look at is controlled experiments, controlled observations. What we have found, or anyone who goes and has a look at where we have arrived, is that vaccination within a certain time frame can change the likelihood of the person who was vaccinated going through some kind of specific disease character, some specific disease symptoms. Vaccination, we have found, can change the likelihood of certain kinds of disease symptoms erupting within a time frame of, say, up to 2 years. Anywhere from 3 months until 2 years, we have found. Vaccination also has been found to lower the chances of the recipient's body putting out markers that on detection will come up as positive for certain microbe particles. For example, these new COVID-19 vaccinations, in their trials, the big deal is that the PCR test result for SARS-CoV-2 was made less likely in the vaccinated group than the unvaccinated group during these controlled trials. The fact of this led to the fact of less COVID-19 diagnoses being made within the trial for the vaccinated group, because the COVID-19 diagnoses are based on a set of symptoms and a necessary SARS-CoV-2 PCR test result positive. We have found for vaccination the ability within a certain time frame to be able to lower one's chances of undergoing or erupting with some specific kind of disease process, like respiratory illness, such as pneumonia. We have found vaccination, when used in a certain way, can lower the chances that a human will undergo pneumonia within up to 2 years, perhaps is the longest as I've seen. We have also found that not only can vaccination lower the specific kind of disease process, it can also, in the same time, in the same trial, lower the chances that someone will put out a specific kind of urinary particle, so that a certain disease diagnoses won't be made. So from the hand of being able to lower specific diagnoses, characters of disease, particles that are allegedly causing disease or unequivocally associated with disease, we have found vaccination, howsoever, manages or can manage to alter the body, leaving it in a way that it will be less likely to undergo a specific kind of disease process such as pneumonia, and put out a specific kind of particle such as one pertinent to a microbe. Howsoever this is achieved by vaccination, whether or not the vaccination actually alters the body in a way that it is made more adept at fighting off or detecting a specific kind of microbe and getting rid of it from the body, whether that is the mechanism by which the body is made less likely to undergo a certain kind of disease process such as pneumonia and whether that's the reason the body is made less likely to put out some kind of particle or biochemical markers that allow for a positive detection for certain microbe particles, or whether the vaccinated body was not made any better at fighting any microbe. Maybe it was just altered in a way that made it less likely to undergo pneumonia or other kinds of disease symptoms, and less likely to put out specific kind of particles or biochemical markers that allow for a positive test result on the detection of specific microbes. Whether the body via vaccination was made more adept or better at fighting off and finding bad microbes, or whether it was just chemically altered, influenced in a way that left it not as likely to undergo with process like pneumonia, and not as likely to put out biochemical markers in its chemistry that make for a positive test result of specific microbes. We don't really know. We could note that antibodies are generated. This too has been unequivocally observed, that vaccination can induce the body to produce immunoglobulin. But whether in these trials, when there is less results of the PCR positive for a certain microbe, and the trials where there were less specific disease characters, such as pneumonia, whether or not it's because the body was made better at fighting one particular kind of microbe, or whether it was because the body was influenced in a way biochemically to be more likely to undergo other kinds of disease processes or issues, this doesn't really matter as much as whether or not the vaccinated body was left in a way where it was more likely to survive in this world full of all different kinds of potential issues, such as microbes, which are evolving constantly. There are new mutant variants out there at all times, at any time. The most important thing is whether the body was made any better or worse overall within all the conditions that a human body is known to potentially erupt with, and all the issues, whether you believe in germs causing disease or not. Was this vaccinated body made better overall? Was this system of physiology, chemistry, was it made to undergo less disease? Was it made more likely to survive in general when it was altered in a way that made it less likely to come up with, say, pneumonia or, say, SARS-CoV-2 PCR test positive? Was diabetes or arthritis made any more likely to occur for this vaccinated organism? Was some mutant form of potentially disease-causing microbe made any more likely to infest this body that was vaccinated? Was the body that was vaccinated and made less likely to come up with a positive PCR result, was it any more likely to come up with a positive PCR result for any other microbe or a brand new one? How would we know this beyond somebody's idea, beyond somebody's musings, beyond somebody's assurance that it just isn't happening, that the vaccinated body was not affected in any way in terms of its ability to stave away harmful conditions, harmful processes, such as potentially disease-causing infesting microbes of an evolving nature? The only way we could really know this is if we measured the body that has been vaccinated against the body that hasn't been, as well controlled as we can be, and we can observe that the vaccinated bodies are better off overall, not just in one specific kind of issue such as pneumonia, not just with one specific kind of diagnosis such as COVID-19, not just that better off at passing SARS-CoV-2 PCR test. And there are no experiments that show overall that the vaccinated body is better than the natural body. There are only experiments and well-controlled observations showing that within certain time frames, vaccinated bodies have been made less likely to erupt with the disease conditions that were targeted in the vaccination, or less likely to be passing as positive for microbe particles that were targeted by the vaccination. So even if the body was made better at fighting one kind of microbe, how on earth would we know that we haven't, by that very action of making it better at fighting a kind of microbe, made it any less better at detecting or fighting other kinds of microbes, or processing other kinds of issues like arthritis and all those other many kinds of issues, like dementia? It is naive to just go off a group of people's hunch that it isn't happening, that the body is made less adept at fighting specific microbes. We need to actually look at some well-controlled experimental outcomes that this has not happened, that the body wasn't made less better at fighting off other microbes or other conditions, or the body wasn't just biochemically tricked and influenced to not undergo the usual kinds of conditions that will come out at that specific time in its life and come out with other ones. Maybe there is an autonomous steering wheel of the body, and often, naturally, it steers to pneumonia. After it's been vaccinated, it might end up steering somewhere else and avoiding pneumonia altogether for that time. And it might not be a good thing. It might not be a better way to steer. The only way we can know whether it's better is by doing well-controlled experiments and getting consistent indications from them, consistent results, such as a vaccinated group having a lower mortality rate. That would be the most broad picture. The fact that we have not got one experiment that shows that vaccination can lower disease outright, can tweak the system in some way that leaves this system with a lower quota of disease incidence or adversity or mortality. The fact we don't have one experiment that shows this, when we can actually get that experiment done, if this effect exists of outright life-saving, should shock you and should invite you into an educational journey. We need real-life conditions, well-controlled settings, and we need consistent indications of vaccination lowering mortality. And can you imagine if it did lower disease but didn't lower mortality? That doesn't make sense. If it can lower disease, it will lower mortality, at least at this stage in life, with what we know about physiology, biology, things that get people, things that push people over the edge of mortality. If vaccination works, it should be able to work, and we should be able to see it, as in if it works for an overall better. Seeing it is seeing it in well-controlled experimental settings. And this would not come by injecting some mice with anthrax vaccination and then injecting them with anthrax and noting that the vaccinated ones were better off than the unvaccinated ones who didn't get an anthrax injection before the challenge injection. I'm talking about the one experiment I have found that does appear to be well controlled, whereby vaccinated organisms endured a lower rate of disease and even death, I think, with the caveat of within unrealistic conditions. That is to say, no animal out there is ever going to be naturally injected with a heap of anthrax or any kind of microbe, because God doesn't have injections. That's a human intervention. So I would say for this one small numbered experiment that I have found where vaccinated mice fared better than unvaccinated mice in this human intervention challenge of being injected with anthrax, I would say even if the vaccination was the reason that those mice fared better, this is not something that we should be cheering about. Unless maybe we are soldiers and we hope to be able to boost our immunological armour in a way that allows us to do a certain work under the threat of anthrax injections. No one should have a bloodstream prepared for the advent of being injected with some material. These are not the testing grounds for vaccination. This is not how we measure the effect of vaccination in the real world. This is the measurement of the effect of vaccination on an organism that gets injected with some material. This is something that doesn't happen in real life. We don't have to worry about if there's some way we can alter our bloodstream that leaves us more likely to survive the advent of being injected with a heap of toxic material of a specific kind.